At precisely 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a crisp, overcast Tuesday in the capital of the German Empire, a profound vulnerability in the human psyche was weaponized. There was no explosion to mark the event. There was no complex mechanical breach of a fortified bank vault. Instead, the breach occurred entirely within the minds of a dozen heavily armed men, facilitated by nothing more than a few yards of dyed wool, some polished brass buttons, and a profound understanding of societal programming. October 16, 1906. On Zilterstrasse in Berlin, the air was brisk, hovering around 9 degrees Celsius, the sky a flat, unbroken gray. Approaching was a squad of 4 privates led by a young corporal named Müller. They were returning to their barracks after completing their guard duty, their rifles slung, their boots striking the cobblestones in perfect, unthinking rhythm. Standing in their path was a man in his late 50s. He was slim, slightly weathered, with a large white mustache. But observers did not look at his face. No one looked at his face. The eye was drawn immediately to the Prussian blue coat, the smart gray military overcoat, the high officer's cap, and the rapier resting casually under a white-gloved hand. He did not step aside for the soldiers. He stopped. He drew himself up to his full height, leveraging the visual weight of his boots and cap, and barked a command that would soon echo across the globe. "Where are you taking these men?" he demanded. Corporal Müller stopped instantly. He clicked his heels. "Back to barracks, sir," he replied. "Turn them around and follow me," the captain ordered. "I have an urgent mission from the all-highest command." In the highly regimented, violently disciplined society of Wilhelmina, Germany, an order invoked in the name of the Kaiser was an absolute force of nature. The corporal did not ask for written orders. He did not ask for identification. He did not question why an elite officer was wandering the streets alone. He simply fell into line. Within the hour, this impromptu strike force grew. They commandeered more men from a local shooting range. Together, they marched on the municipal headquarters of an independent city, arrested its highest-ranking civilian officials, severed its communications, and emptied its treasury of exactly 4,002 marks and 37 pfennigs. It was a perfectly executed, bloodless coup. But the man giving the orders was not a captain. He was not a soldier. He was a 57-year-old unemployed shoemaker, a convicted forger, and a homeless drifter named Friedrich Wilhelm Voigt. The event was not merely the history of a robbery. It was a forensic study of a social exploit, an examination of what happens when a society fetishizes symbols of power to such an extreme degree that the symbol entirely eclipses the reality it is meant to represent. The thread that ran through this entire incident was a concept the Germans call Kadavergehorsam, corpse obedience, the unquestioning mechanical submission to authority. In the context of the architecture of desperation that defined his life, Wilhelm Voigt was not a criminal mastermind born to privilege. He was a byproduct of a merciless, self-perpetuating system. February 13th, 1849. Friedrich Wilhelm Voigt was born in Tilsit, East Prussia, a town that now exists as Sovetsk in the Kaliningrad Oblast. His life, a life measured in sentences, began unremarkably as the son of a shoemaker until his first collision with the machinery of the Prussian state. In 1863, at the tender age of 14, Voigt was arrested and sentenced to 14 days in prison for a minor theft. In a modern context, a 2-week sentence for a juvenile might be viewed as a harsh but temporary correction. In 19th century Prussia, it was a permanent branding. This single minor infraction triggered an immediate and irrevocable expulsion from school. At 14, Voigt's access to formal education, upward mobility, and societal grace was permanently severed. From that moment, Voigt was caught in a gravitational pull he could never escape. He learned his father's trade of shoemaking, but the stigma of his conviction haunted him, closing doors and limiting his existence to the margins of society. Between 1864 and 1891, Voigt was trapped in a relentless cycle of recidivism, accumulating a total of 25 years behind bars for a string of petty thefts, forgeries, and burglaries. His most devastating sentence came in 1891. Driven by desperation, he attempted an unsuccessful burglary of a court cashier's office. For this failed, bloodless crime, the state crushed him with a 15-year sentence. February 12, 1906. When the heavy iron doors of the penitentiary finally opened, Voigt was 57 years old. He had spent nearly half of his natural life in a cage. He emerged into a world that had accelerated into the 20th century, a world increasingly obsessed with paperwork, categorization, tracking, and control. Trapped in what would become a bureaucratic catch-22, Voigt made a genuine, documented attempt to integrate into society upon his release in 1906. He drifted to Wismar, successfully securing employment with a well-reputed court shoemaker. For a brief moment, the ghost had a shape. He had a trade. He had an income. But the Grand Duchy of Mecklenburg-Schwerin had no tolerance for ex-convicts. As soon as his extensive criminal record was flagged by the local authorities, he was formally banned from residing within the duchy's borders. The state, having punished him for 15 years, decided that his punishment must continue in perpetuity. August 24th, 1906, he traveled to Rixdorf, a suburb near Berlin, to live with his sister Bertha, and found work in a local shoe factory, hoping to vanish into the industrial hum of the imperial capital. However, the German Empire operated on a strict panopticon-like system of domestic passports and residency permits. Because of his criminal record, the local police deemed him an undesirable, and on this day, the authorities formally denied his residency permit and ordered him to leave the Berlin area. The sheer psychological weight of this administrative paradox was crushing. Voigt needed a residence permit to hold legal employment. He needed legal employment to prove to the authorities that he was a rehabilitated citizen worthy of a residence permit. Without the permit, he could not legally stay in the country. Without a valid passport, he could not legally leave the country. He was trapped in an administrative purgatory, a bureaucratic paradox that systematically engineered his marginalization. The state had constructed a maze with no exit, practically guaranteeing his return to crime. Faced with this existential dead end, Voigt chose defiance. He resigned from the shoe factory in early October, 10 days before the heist, and lived as an unregistered, illegal resident in the shadows of Berlin. It was in this state of total desperation that a radical, almost theatrical solution began to form in his mind. If the state reduced human value entirely to official documentation and authorized uniforms, he would simply acquire the uniform. He would bypass the paperwork by donning the ultimate symbol of Prussian authority. He would use their own Kadavergehorsam against them. Forging the illusion that would become the catalyst for his plan, he relied on the psychological landscape of Imperial Germany in 1906, which was dominated by the military. Kaiser Wilhelm II had actively cultivated this culture. In an 1891 speech to raw recruits, the emperor explicitly demanded unwavering devotion, stating that even if he ordered them to shoot down their own relatives, they must follow his orders without a murmur. Voigt understood this intimately. He recognized that a military uniform carried absolute authority and required no supporting paperwork. If one wore the rank did the speaking. The man inside the uniform was irrelevant. He was merely the meat that animated the cloth. The anatomy of the forgery revealed that Voigt did not simply steal a uniform. He built one, piece by piece. He scoured various secondhand shops, military surplus stores, and flea markets across Potsdam and Berlin. He meticulously tested the psychological effect of individual components on passing soldiers, observing how their posture changed when they saw a specific cap or coat. He specifically targeted the attire of a captain in the 1st Foot Guard Regiment. This was not a random choice. The 1st Foot Guard was the elite infantry regiment of the Royal Prussian Army, stationed in Potsdam. Unofficially known as the 1st Regiment of Christendom, it was the personal bodyguard regiment of the kings of Prussia, tracing its lineage back to the famous Potsdam Giants. All princes of Prussia were commissioned as lieutenants in this regiment upon their 10th birthdays. To wear this uniform was to project an intimidating proximity to the Kaiser himself. The forensic discrepancies of his disguise highlighted the blinding power of the symbol. Regarding the coat facings, the 1st Foot Guard standard required poppy red collar, cuffs, and turnbacks. Voigt's assembled disguise featured mismatched fabric dyes due to piecemeal secondhand sourcing, which was ignored by observers as the overall silhouette commanded attention. For the cuff style, the standard was Swedish cuffs with no slit or flap, and 2 horizontal buttons, whereas Voigt wore Brandenburg cuffs with a vertical slit, dark blue flap, and 3 buttons, a catastrophic error in military dress code, yet completely overlooked. The required headgear was a Prussian blue officer's cap with pristine regimental insignia, but Voigt wore a standard officer's cap, slightly worn from previous owners, which nonetheless conferred immediate height, status, and authoritative posture. Finally, instead of the regulation finely polished officer's sword, he carried a mismatched rapier, providing a prop for physical posturing and confident hand placement. The most glaring error, the detail that makes this heist a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, was the cuffs. The 1st Foot Guard proudly wore Swedish cuffs, a distinct mark of their elite status. Standard line infantry wore Brandenburg cuffs. Voigt's coat bore the standard Brandenburg style. Any corporal, any sergeant, any police officer in Berlin should have spotted this immediately. Yet, the blinding effect of the uniform's overarching authority was so total that no one noticed the mismatch. The symbol overwhelmed the details. The hubris of the Prussian military mind could not compute that a civilian would dare wear the uniform, and therefore, they did not look closely enough to see that the uniform was a lie. October 16th, 1906. On this morning, setting out into the meteorological environment and the march, Voigt retrieved his assembled uniform from a luggage storage locker. The operational environment was highly favorable, as historical meteorological data for Berlin on that specific day reveals a cool, overcast autumn morning. At 9 a.m., the temperature was 5 degrees Celsius with 0 millimeters of rainfall, which allowed Voigt to wear layers without sweating, aiding his disguise. By 12 p.m., the temperature rose to 9 degrees Celsius with 0 millimeters of rainfall, providing comfortable marching weather for the commandeered troops. At 1500 p.m., it reached 10 degrees Celsius with 0 millimeters of rainfall, keeping the streets relatively busy and providing cover in crowds. The brisk weather allowed Voigt to wear a heavy, smart gray military overcoat over the uniform without arousing suspicion. This overcoat was crucial. It hid his slight frame, his age, and smoothed over any further imperfections in the tunic beneath. By early afternoon, Voigt was fully transformed. He executed his intercept on Silterstrasse, commandeering Corporal Müller and his 4 privates. His performance was flawless. He did not ask. He commanded. Shortly after, near the Plötzensee firing range, he intercepted a second squad of 6 soldiers, seamlessly folding them into his private army. He now commanded a heavily armed detachment of 10 to 11 men. When questioned by the soldiers about transport, Voigt calmly explained that he had been unable to requisition motor vehicles. Instead, the captain and his troops marched to the Puttlitzstrasse station and boarded a standard civilian train. During a transfer layover in Rummelsburg, Voigt demonstrated a masterful, almost forensic understanding of officer-enlisted dynamics. He bought his men beer and handed each soldier a single mark to purchase lunch at the station. This small act of paternalistic military care cemented their absolute loyalty. They were no longer just following a uniform. They were following their captain. They would have marched into artillery fire for him. Instead, he led them to the suburbs. Beginning the siege of the town hall, their destination was Köpenick, a charming independent municipality located just southeast of Berlin, where the Dom and Spree rivers converged to form an idyllic island. The target was the Köpenick Town Hall, a towering red-brick Gothic structure built between 1901 and 1904 by architects Hugo Kinzer and Hans Schutte. It was an imposing symbol of civic pride, boasting a 54-meter-high tower, a magnificent staircase, and a large heraldic room. When Voigt and his men arrived, they moved with terrifying military precision. Voigt ordered his men to fix bayonets. They stormed the building. The ground floor housed 20 office rooms, the local police department's quarters, and, crucially, the city savings bank and vault. Voigt deployed his guards to seal every entrance and exit. He then stepped outside. He spotted local civilian gendarmes patrolling the area. Exercising his fake military jurisdiction over civilian law enforcement, he commanded the police to cordon off the perimeter, maintain public order, and prevent calls to Berlin for 1 hour by shutting down the local post office. The sheer audacity of the moment was striking. A homeless ex-convict ordered the police to help him secure a crime scene, and the police, completely cowed by the presence of a Prussian guard officer, immediately obeyed. Voigt had isolated the building. He had severed its communications. He had achieved total local superiority. Initiating the arrest of the mayor, Voigt left guards at the doors and marched up the grand staircase to the first floor, which housed 25 offices, including the living and working quarters of the mayor. He burst into the office of Mayor Georg Langerhans, a mild-mannered man in his mid-30s with pince-nez spectacles and a pointed goatee. Langerhans stood up in astonishment. Before the mayor could speak, Voigt declared that he and the chief cashier von Wiltberg were under arrest by direct order of the Kaiser, citing suspicions of crooked bookkeeping and irregular payments for underground work. "Where is your warrant?" Langerhans demanded, attempting to assert his civilian legal rights. Voigt simply pointed to the heavily armed soldiers standing behind him with fixed bayonets. The implication was clear. In the German Empire, the military was the warrant. Mayor Langerhans surrendered without another word. Voigt then ordered the mayor's wife, Frau Langerhans, to be confined to her quarters to prevent interference. The civilian government of Köpenick had fallen in less than 10 minutes. At this pivot during the phantom extraction, the historical record reads like a brilliantly executed high-stakes financial heist. The sequence of events strongly suggests a mastermind securing a massive payday by locking down the building, neutralizing the leadership, and taking control of the bank. But the microscopic details of the extraction revealed the true, tragic nature of Voigt's motive. With the mayor neutralized, Voigt demanded that Treasurer von Wiltberg produce an accounting statement and open the municipal treasury. Under the watchful eyes of the soldiers, the treasurer himself assisted Voigt in filling canvas bags with the city's funds. The total confiscated amounted to exactly 4,002 marks and 37 pfennigs. If Voigt were purely a thief, he would have grabbed the money and run. Instead, he maintained the illusion of bureaucracy to the bitter end. He sat at a desk and meticulously wrote out an official receipt for the exact amount of 4,002 marks and 37 pfennigs. With a deeply cynical sense of irony, he signed the receipt von Malzahn, the exact surname of the director of the prison where he had just served his 15-year sentence. He appended the initials HI1GR, designating captain in the 1st Guard Regiment. An anomaly existed, however. Historical testimonies and Voigt's own later admissions suggest that the 4,000 marks were actually a secondary objective. While the money was substantial, equivalent to years of wages for a working-class citizen, Voigt's primary target within the town hall was the municipal passport office. Voigt later claimed that he initiated the entire elaborate operation to bypass the police bureaucracy and stamp his own blank passport. He wanted to forge the residency permit he needed to exist legally in Germany. He ransacked the registry office on the 1st floor, desperately searching for the official passport stamps. Tragically, he discovered a fatal flaw in his intelligence gathering. Köpenick, despite its size and its grand new town hall, did not possess the authority to issue the specific regional passports he required. Those stamps were held in a different jurisdiction. Standing in that office, having commandeered an army, arrested a mayor, and risked execution for treason, the one piece of rubber and ink needed to buy his freedom simply wasn't there. Realizing his primary objective was a total failure, Voigt pivoted to the secondary objective, the cash. He had already crossed the Rubicon. He could not leave empty-handed. With the money secured, Voigt moved to the extraction phase. He commandeered 2 horse-drawn carriages. He ordered his grenadiers to load Mayor Langerhans and Treasurer von Wiltberg into the carriages and instructed the soldiers to escort the prisoners to the Neue Wache, the central military guardhouse in Berlin, for formal interrogation. Before the carriages departed, Voigt demanded the civilian officials give their word of honor that they would not attempt to flee. He then turned to the remaining guards at the town hall. He ordered them to hold their positions and secure the building for exactly half an hour, after which they were to return to their barracks. The soldiers snapped to attention and saluted. Voigt picked up his bags of cash, walked out of the red brick building, and headed toward the Köpenick railway station. He drank a beer, boarded a train back to Berlin, and vanished. Somewhere along the line, he stripped off the Prussian blue coat, the cap, and the sword, changing back into the drab, worn civilian clothes of a 57-year-old shoemaker. The captain of Köpenick dissolved into the ether. In the fallout that left a nation looking in the mirror, it took hours for the illusion to fully shatter. Mayor Langerhans, Treasurer von Wiltberg, and their heavily armed escort arrived at the Neue Wache military guardhouse in central Berlin. They presented themselves for interrogation regarding the crooked bookkeeping ordered by the Kaiser. The commanding officers at the Neue Wache were entirely baffled. There were no orders from the Kaiser. There was no investigation into Köpenick's finances. A frantic series of telegraphs and telephone calls to the Ministry of War and the local police precincts confirmed the impossible. The military had not seized the town. An imposter had. When the news broke the following morning, the reaction was seismic. The event, swiftly dubbed the Köpenickiade, became an instant global sensation. For the Prussian military and the Berlin police commissioner, von Jagau, it was a humiliation of catastrophic proportions. A massive dragnet was immediately instituted. The police launched a desperate search for a man whose only identifying feature was a mismatched uniform that no longer existed. But for the public, both domestic and international, the Köpenick heist provoked inextinguishable laughter. The world's press seized upon the story as the ultimate indictment of German militarism. The New York Times ran the headline that Germany seized the joke, even if the laugh is on her. The British press, already deeply suspicious of German military buildup, used the event for potent anti-militarism propaganda. Satirical magazines like London's Punch delighted in mocking the absurd rigidity of the German state. Within Germany itself, the reaction was layered and complex. Left liberal commentators viewed the incident not as a comedy, but as a terrifying proof of concept. If a homeless cobbler could execute a bloodless coup simply by wearing a coat, what was stopping a rogue general from launching a real military overthrow of the civilian government? It demonstrated the absolute fragility of civilian institutions when subjected to the perceived threat of military force. Yet, the everyday citizens of the empire found the swindle inherently hilarious. Cabarets like Berlin's Metropole Theater wove skits about the fake captain into their shows within days. The public merriment, however, was a double-edged sword. As historians later noted, the laughter did not dismantle the ideological hold of militarism. In many ways, it reinforced it. The public laughed at the absurdity of the impostor, but they did not question the fundamental rule that a uniform must be obeyed. The system was not broken, it had simply been hacked. Kadavergehorsam remained intact. Before the betrayal, for 10 days, Voigt lived quietly in a new accommodation in Berlin, his 4,000 marks stashed away. He might have vanished into the historical record entirely, living out his days in quiet comfort. But the architecture of the criminal underworld is just as treacherous and unforgiving as the bureaucracy of the state. The police had offered a massive reward of 2,000 marks for information leading to the capture of the fake captain. A former cellmate of Voigt's, identified in historical records as a man named Kallenberg, heard the descriptions of the heist. Kallenberg knew Voigt. He knew of Voigt's deep-seated resentment of the passport system, and he knew Voigt had been meticulously studying military regulations and uniform details while they were incarcerated together. October 26, 1906. For 2,000 marks, loyalty evaporated, and Kallenberg went to the authorities. Just a week and a half after he arrested a city, the police made their move. They burst into Voigt's room while he was eating breakfast. He did not resist. He did not fight. The ghost had been dragged back into the light. December 1st, 1906. In the conclusion that led to the state's forgiveness, the trial of Wilhelm Voigt, which concluded on this day, was a media circus of unprecedented scale. Journalists from around the globe descended on the Berlin courtroom to see the mastermind who had humiliated the greatest military machine in Europe. What they found was not a hardened, terrifying militant, but a tired, slight 57-year-old shoemaker. During the trial, Voigt's defense did not rely on denying the act, but on exposing the systemic cruelty that drove him to it. He spoke eloquently of his inability to find legal work, his constant expulsion by the police, and his desperate failed search for the passport stamps in the Köpenick town hall. The court faced a profound dilemma. Legally, Voigt was guilty of severe crimes: impersonating an officer, kidnapping by way of the false arrest of the mayor, and grand larceny. However, punishing him too harshly would only amplify the international perception that the German justice system was barbaric, rigid, and incapable of nuance. The judge ultimately sentenced Voigt to 4 years in prison. When compared to the crushing 15 years he had previously served for a mere attempted burglary, this was a remarkably lenient sentence. But the story of the captain of Köpenick had transcended the courtroom. Voigt had become a folk hero, a living avatar of the common man's struggle against the crushing weight of the bureaucracy. The ultimate twist in the narrative, however, came from the absolute apex of the very system Voigt had mocked. When the detailed reports of the heist reached the desk of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the emperor did not react with the fury of a slighted autocrat. Instead, he laughed. Wilhelm II was deeply amused by the audacity of the crime. More importantly, he saw a twisted validation of his own life's work. To the Kaiser, the fact that 10 soldiers, a police force, and an entire civilian government instantly obeyed a man simply because he wore a Prussian uniform was not a systemic failure. It was a triumph of military discipline. It proved that his subjects were perfectly trained. The Kaiser reportedly described Voigt as an amiable scoundrel and a brilliant fellow. August 16, 1908. After Voigt had served just 20 months of his 4-year sentence, Emperor Wilhelm II intervened directly. He exercised his supreme authority and granted the shoemaker a full royal pardon. Entering his Luxembourg twilight, Wilhelm Voigt walked out of prison for the last time not as an outcast, but as a global celebrity. The public's fascination with the captain of Köpenick was highly lucrative. Voigt capitalized on his notoriety, touring variety shows in Germany, Canada, and the United States. He posed for photographs in a replica captain's uniform, signing autographs for adoring crowds. In 1909, he published his autobiography, How I Became the Captain of Köpenick, which became a massive bestseller. Having finally accumulated enough wealth and status to entirely bypass the residency restrictions that had once ruined his life, he moved to Luxembourg in 1910. He purchased a home at 5, Rue Nyperg in the Gare district, worked quietly as a waiter and shoemaker, and became one of the first people in the Grand Duchy to own an automobile. January 3, 1922. Friedrich Wilhelm Voigt died in Luxembourg at the age of 72. His grave in the Notre Dame Cemetery remains a site of quiet pilgrimage, where visitors still leave coins on his headstone in tribute to the man who stole a city. The legacy of October 16, 1906, extends far beyond a clever heist. The story of the Captain of Köpenick, immortalized in Karl Zuckmayer's famous 1931 satirical play and numerous subsequent films, serves as a permanent forensic warning about the dangers of unchecked institutional authority. Voigt's crime was a mirror held up to the face of a society that had stopped seeing the human being and started seeing only the uniform. He proved that when a culture demands unquestioning obedience to symbols of power, it leaves the vault door wide open for anyone willing to put on the costume. In the end, the homeless man did not defeat the German Empire through force of arms. He defeated it through compliance. He gave the state exactly what it asked for: total, blind obedience. And in doing so, he showed us the inherent madness of the machine.